Man, Dan Blocker was something else. That beloved star who brought Hoss Cartwright to life on Bonanza. His legacy still holds a special place in fans' hearts today. I'm going to walk you through what happened to his family after he died so suddenly, what became of his house, how his devoted wife coped, and those 4 kids he left behind, including the one who followed Dad's footsteps into Hollywood. And yeah, we'll talk about how much money the big guy was worth when he unexpectedly left this world. Net worth. You know, even though Bonanza went off the air over 50 years ago, it's still one of those westerns people just can't forget. Folks didn't just tune in for the gunslinging and horseback riding. They connected with those strong family values and the way the show tackled tough stuff like racism and sexism when nobody else would touch it. A huge chunk of that success? That was Dan Blocker winning hearts as gentle giant Hoss Cartwright. When he suddenly passed, it absolutely floored everyone. Fans, castmates, you name it. At his death, he'd built up about $5 million, according to Celebrity Net Worth. Pretty impressive for a guy who started with practically nothing. Beyond his acting checks, Blocker had a real head for business too. He invested in this chain of Bonanza steakhouse restaurants that added nicely to his bank account. Just goes to show there was more to him than met the eye. Not just an actor, but a smart businessman who knew how to leverage his fame beyond that TV screen. Early life. Dan Blocker, big guy, big heart, made waves right from birth, literally. Born December 10th, 1928, in tiny DeKalb, Texas, little Bobby Dan Davis Blocker tipped the scales at a whopping 14 pounds, the biggest baby ever born in Bowie County. Talk about making an entrance, right? When Dan was just a kid, his folks, Ora Shack Blocker and Mary Arizona Blocker, packed up and moved to O'Donnell, Texas, about 40 miles south of Lubbock. Poor Shack had been a farmer, but lost everything in the Great Depression. Somehow, he scraped together enough cash to open a little grocery store. Those early years, the family literally lived in the back of that shop, and young Dan pitched in however he could, lugging groceries to cars, doing odd jobs around town. His dad used to joke with buddies that he'd pay them to hire Dan because the boy was so big he was accidentally knocking stuff over in the store. Funny thing is, that size would end up being his meal ticket. Despite being built like a small mountain, young Dan was actually super sensitive and buried himself in books while other boys his age were out playing ball. This love of stories and reading shaped him in ways nobody could have guessed, especially folks who later only knew him as the hulking Hoss Cartwright on their TV screens. Education and early career. At 13, Dan shipped off to Texas Military Institute, where he played linebacker on the football team. The kid had talent, enough to score him a scholarship to Sul Ross State University, where he planned to study English while keeping up with football. By 18, he was already standing 6 feet 3 inches and pushing 300 pounds, though he'd grow another inch taller and pack on even more weight as he got older. Football might have paid for school, but a lucky accident changed everything. During a production of Arsenic and Old Lace, the drama club needed somebody strong enough to move these heavy dummies used as corpses. Dan was perfect, right? But he didn't just help backstage. They gave him a small part as Teddy Brewster, the eccentric nephew of those murderous old ladies. The second he stepped on stage, bam! Something clicked. The rush of performing, hearing the audience react, feeling that energy in the theater, he was hooked, plain and simple. Dan switched his major from English to speech and drama, and after getting his degree, reportedly turned down offers to play pro football. Instead, he chased his theater dreams, doing summer stock and repertory shows before landing a small role in a Broadway production of King Lear. Military service. Then Uncle Sam came calling, and Dan got drafted into the Army to fight in Korea. He didn't just serve, he served with honor, earning a Purple Heart plus several other medals. By 1952, he'd worked his way up to sergeant and got honorably discharged from the Army. His time in Korea? Way rougher than most fans ever knew. Fellow soldiers told stories about Dan carrying a wounded buddy through enemy fire for nearly 3 miles to get medical help, an act that earned him major respect from his unit. The winter conditions were brutal, 30 below zero, and Dan got frostbite that would flare up painfully throughout his life. These experiences hit him hard. Friends noticed he hardly ever talked about the war, keeping those memories locked away. What he saw firsthand in combat became the foundation for his later pacifist views and why he opposed Vietnam so strongly. Family life. That same year, he married Dolphia Parker, his college sweetheart from Sul Ross. With a new wife and dreams of stability, Dan took what seemed like the responsible path, went back to school and earned a master's degree in dramatic arts. Now a family man, he and Dolphia eventually had 4 kids, twin daughters, Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, and 2 sons, David and Dirk. Dan buckled down on providing for them. He taught high school English and drama in Sonora, Texas, before later teaching 6th grade in New Mexico. At the time, it probably just seemed like another teaching gig. But with every move westward, Dan was unknowingly inching closer to where he was meant to be, California. Dan took to married life like a duck to water. He genuinely loved teaching and being around kids, sharing his passion for words and theater in ways that probably stuck with those students forever. By all accounts, he was gold, kind and generous to the core, though known to have a quick temper. But just as fast as he might blow up, he'd cool down and apologize, always owning his mistakes. When he moved his family to California, it wasn't with stars in his eyes. He actually planned to get a PhD in dramatic arts at UCLA while continuing to teach. To make ends meet, he started auditioning for TV roles in the mid-1950s and scored small parts in westerns, which were all the rage back then. During those early struggling years in California, the Blockers were flat broke sometimes. Neighbors remember how Dan would take bouncer or security guard jobs at night after teaching all day and auditioning in the evenings. Dead tired as he must have been, he made it a ritual to read bedtime stories to his kids every night, doing all these crazy character voices that made them giggle. His daughter Deborah later shared that even when they could barely afford groceries, her dad would somehow make their simple meals feel special, creating make-believe royal banquets that turned their humble dinner table into an adventure. Acting had always been in his blood, and these small roles rekindled that spark, letting him step into different characters and flex his talent. Soon, he was popping up in hit shows like Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and Maverick, where folks started noticing his natural funny bone. In 1958, he landed a recurring role in this short-lived series, Cimarron City. When the show got canned, it probably felt like a kick in the teeth. But looking back, best thing that could have happened, because that twist of fate left him available to take on the role that would change everything. Bonanza. Any actor trying to make it in Hollywood would have killed to be in Dan Blocker's shoes, but it wasn't until producer David Dortort cast him as Hoss Cartwright on Bonanza that Dan finally shelved his doctoral dreams to act full-time. And even then, it wasn't about chasing fame. The role was just so demanding that it left zero time for anything else. In a revealing chat shortly before he died, Blocker admitted that giving up on his PhD was one of his biggest regrets. "I always believed education was the most noble pursuit," he told a journalist friend. "Acting was something I stumbled into, but teaching was my calling." That explains why, even when Bonanza was huge, he still mentored young actors on set and volunteered at local schools whenever he could squeeze it in. Several successful Hollywood actors later said those informal coaching sessions with Blocker were game changers for their careers. If Little Joe was the heartthrob of Bonanza, Hoss was its heartbeat, the very soul of the show. As the middle son of Ben Cartwright, this wealthy Nevada rancher and widower, Hoss wasn't the brightest bulb like his older brother Adam. He was awkward and tongue-tied around women, often the butt of practical jokes, and easy for others to underestimate. But Dan brought something special to the character, this overwhelming warmth, kindness, and genuine goodness. Hoss became the fan favorite, especially with kids who connected with his childlike innocence. In lots of ways, Dan and Hoss shared this deep need for fairness and justice, which Dan carried both on and off screen. He played the role guided by words from 18th century Quaker missionary Stephen Grelle. "We shall pass this way on earth but once. If there is any kindness we can show or good act we can do, let us do it now, for we will never pass this way again." During his Bonanza years, Dan formed tight bonds with his co-stars, especially Lorne Greene and Michael Landon. Their connection went way beyond just working together. Spending from dawn till dusk, 5 days a week, naturally made them feel like a real family. They hung out offset too, and Dan even stood as best man at Michael Landon's wedding to Lynn Noe. Despite Bonanza's crazy schedule, Dan managed a few movie roles, notably working with Frank Sinatra in Come Blow Your Horn and Lady in Cement. Though Hollywood became home base, Dan never forgot his Texas roots. He moved his parents to California to be near him, but folks in O'Donnell never stopped celebrating their hometown hero. They got a kick out of the irony. This bookworm kid, who'd rather read than ride horses, grew up to become a Western icon galloping across TV screens every Sunday night. What most fans don't know is that Blocker nearly walked away from Bonanza at the peak of its popularity. Production memos found years later showed that during contract talks for season 10, he'd gotten fed up with scripts that treated Hoss like a one-dimensional joke. In a heartfelt letter to producer David Dortort, Blocker wrote, "I cannot continue to play a character who exists merely to be laughed at. Hoss has a depth that isn't being explored." His ultimatum triggered a major shift in storylines, giving Hoss more complex emotional arcs that let Blocker show his serious acting chops, and led to some of the show's most powerful episodes. Marriage and family. Beyond being a fantastic actor, Dan Blocker was a devoted husband and loving father. Though his life got cut way too short, his impact lives on deeply with his family, friends, and the countless fans who welcomed him into their living rooms each week. Dan met Dolphia Parker, the love of his life, while they were both students at Sul Ross State University. Parker, standing just 5 feet 3 inches, had grown up on an Oklahoma ranch where her family bred quarter horses. She was working backstage for a production of Arsenic and Old Lace when fate stepped in. During one rehearsal, director Ann Kate Ferguson needed somebody strong to carry a dead body from the cellar. She spotted Dan watching from the audience and roped him into helping. Though reluctant at first, he agreed if his buddy could join him. Before long, both guys were hooked on theater. Their first meeting wasn't exactly romantic, though. Dan had been goofing off in the auditorium, distracting the actors, and Parker had to kick him out. But when Dan realized he had feelings for her, he shaped up fast and worked his way back into her good graces. Parker quickly spotted Dan's natural talent and pushed him toward theater instead of football. By junior year, Dan had fully embraced acting, switching his major to speech at Parker's urging. He dove headfirst into drama productions, joining the Mask and Slippers Drama Club and taking roles in various plays, including Fumed Oak by Noel Coward, where he played a horrible husband opposite Parker. Dan graduated in 1950 from Sul Ross with a B.S. in speech and drama. Though offered a shot at pro football, he turned it down to chase his growing passion for acting. After graduation, he and buddy Dennis Reed headed east, joining Summer Stock Theater, starting with Brattle Hall Theater in Boston. That same year, Dan even scored a role in a Broadway production of King Lear. Friends from this period remember Blocker feeling crushed by his Broadway experience. As an unknown kid from Texas, the established New York theater crowd basically ignored him, and critics didn't even mention his performances. He spent several cold, lonely months in a tiny Hell's Kitchen apartment, eating just one meal a day to save money. In letters to Dolphia, he described feeling like a giant nobody in a city full of important somebodies. This rough patch nearly made him quit acting altogether, and it was only Dolphia's unwavering support that kept him from heading back to Texas defeated, a decision that would have changed television history. But just as his acting career started picking up steam, everything got put on hold when he received draft papers in 1950. Dan got inducted into the Army, spending 4 months at Camp Polk in Louisiana. Even in uniform, he stayed connected to theater, appearing in a production of Macbeth. After training, he joined the 179th Infantry Regiment and shipped off to Japan before heading to Korea, where he faced some truly brutal conditions. On Christmas Eve, 1951, Dan and his squad got trapped by enemy soldiers on Hill 255 for a grueling 10 hours. Despite the hell he went through, he made it out alive, and on September 23, 1952, received his honorable discharge. Just 2 days later, on September 25, 1952, Dan married Dolphia Parker in a small ceremony in Carlsbad, New Mexico. They exchanged vows before retired Presbyterian minister Reverend J. Dando, starting a lifelong partnership built on love, respect, and absolute loyalty. The rushed wedding timing revealed a deeply romantic side to their relationship few people knew about. According to Dolphia's sister, who was maid of honor, Dan and Dolphia had made a pact before he left for Korea. They'd marry within 1 week of his return, no matter what. During deployment, Dan carried a small photo of Dolphia, wrapped in waxed paper, inside his helmet for protection. When he finally made it home, exhausted from Korea, his first words to her were, "I'm ready if you are." True to their promise, they tied the knot less than 48 hours later, with Dan still sporting his military buzz cut and Dolphia in a simple dress she'd sewn herself. After marrying Dolphia, Dan headed back to Sul Ross State University for a master's degree in dramatic arts. Money was tight in those early marriage years, so he took teaching jobs to support his growing family. He started teaching English and drama at a high school in Sonora, Texas, before moving to Carlsbad, New Mexico, to teach 6th grade. Eventually, the family relocated to California, where Dan kept teaching while prepping for PhD studies. But with 4 kids to feed, his teacher's paycheck just wasn't cutting it. Realizing he needed more income, he decided to give acting another shot. He started auditioning for TV roles, landing bit parts in westerns, which were crazy popular back then. These early gigs reignited his passion for slipping into different characters. Soon he was showing up in the biggest series of the day: Gunsmoke, The Rifleman, Have Gun Will Travel, and Maverick. In 1958, he snagged a recurring role on the Samaran City, a promising Western series. When it got canceled after just 1 season, it felt like bad news, but turned out to be perfect timing. Because the show tanked, Dan was available when creator David Dortort started casting for his next project, Bonanza. Though Bonanza started slow, it soon exploded, catapulting Dan to fame and financial security. But the shooting schedule was so intense, he just couldn't keep up with his studies. Despite his growing success, Dan stayed remarkably grounded. He took film roles alongside Frank Sinatra in Come Blow Your Horn and Lady in Cement, but never chased the spotlight for its own sake. In fact, he found the public's obsession with him kind of puzzling. He once admitted he saw acting simply as a way to make a living, not a path to fame. While he appreciated his fans, the constant attention made him uncomfortable, especially when people grabbed at him in public. "I hate being pulled at and grasped and tugged," he once said, making it clear fame was just an annoying side effect of doing what he loved. This unease with fame partly came from a scary incident early in his Bonanza days. During one of his first public appearances at a department store in Los Angeles, fans got so wild to meet Hoss that barriers collapsed and a young girl got hurt in the crush. Dan was devastated, spent hours at the hospital with her family, and quietly paid her medical bills. The incident haunted him, and afterward, he only did appearances in controlled settings with proper security. His castmates noticed that while they enjoyed the fan attention, Blocker would visibly tense up whenever crowds formed around them in public. Fatherhood. Dan tried everything to give his kids a normal childhood, shielding them from his celebrity status. But despite his best efforts, even simple family outings turned into public spectacles. Something as basic as getting ice cream would draw crowds of fans, young and old alike. The constant attention drove him nuts. He once confessed, "A man never appreciates his privacy until he's lost it, and it bugs me. It really bugs me. I try to keep the family normal, unaffected by father's so-called celebrity. It's a losing battle." Dan doted on his 4 children, twin daughters Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, and sons Dirk and David Blocker. Both sons eventually carved their own paths in Hollywood. Dirk became an actor, while David built a successful career as a producer, even nabbing an Emmy in 1998 for Don King, Only in America. In 2018, Dirk gave fans a rare glimpse into his dad's loving nature by sharing an old family photo for Father's Day. He captioned it, "Wishing all fathers and sons a joyous day. Treasure every moment." At home, Dan threw himself into being a dad. His massive 260-pound frame became a source of fun as he playfully wrestled with his kids or muscled his way past them to commandeer their electric race car set. The big guy had a heart to match, and his playful spirit made him as much of a joy at home as he was on screen. Despite his packed schedule, Dan created a Christmas tradition his kids would cherish long after he was gone. Each year, he'd write personalized adventure stories starring each child as the hero. These weren't just quick notes. They were elaborate tales he worked on for months, often running 20 to 30 pages, complete with pictures drawn by friends from the Bonanza art department. David Blocker later revealed his father would wake up at 4 a.m. during December to work on these stories before heading to set. One Christmas, when production delays kept him working through the holidays, he arranged for Michael Landon to dress as Santa and deliver the stories to his children, reading them aloud in character, a memory the Blocker kids treasured forever. Dan Parker and their kids lived quietly in a 4-bedroom home in Northridge, a suburb in the San Fernando Valley, about 20 miles from Paramount Studios. The house had 3 bathrooms and a swimming pool, but they weren't flashy about it. Parker drove a 1963 Cadillac, while Dan zipped around in a brand new Corvette Stingray. Despite his fame, Dan stayed connected to his roots, keeping up with old friends from his teaching days in Texas and Los Angeles. He and Parker avoided Hollywood's glitzy party scene, preferring quiet nights at home. Dan's influence on his children ran deep, especially with Dirk. Growing up, Dirk learned from his dad that fame wasn't worth chasing. He also got bitten by the acting bug, tagging along with Dan to work. In an MTV interview, Dirk shared, "I suppose I was bitten by the acting bug at an early age while going to work with my dad." Watching his father on set was like a masterclass in acting. Dirk saw firsthand how Dan and his co-stars would chat casually about current events before smoothly slipping into character. More than anything, he saw how much his father truly loved his work, a passion that eventually inspired Dirk to follow the same path. Despite his love for acting, Dan drew a hard line between work and family. He refused to let his kids pursue acting until they finished school, firmly believing they needed a backup plan if showbiz didn't pan out. This caused some tension, particularly with Dirk, who was itching to start auditioning as a teenager. In one of their final conversations before Dan's death, he finally gave Dirk his blessing to pursue acting, with one condition, that he promised to finish college. Dirk kept that promise, completing his degree even as his acting career took off, later calling it the last gift my father gave me, the value of keeping your word, even when it's difficult. Dirk Blocker's career. Dirk didn't initially care much about acting, but that changed when he started hanging around on set with his dad. His schedule was such that this was one of the only ways to spend a lot of time with him, Dirk once said, showing just how committed Dan was as a father, despite his crazy work schedule. Over time, Dirk found himself drawn to acting, influenced by seeing his father's genuine love for the craft. He soon started booking guest spots, including appearances on Little House on the Prairie. From there, his career took off with roles in The Border, Poltergeist, and 21 Jump Street. Despite his success, Dirk also valued education, earning a bachelor's degree so he could teach if he ever wanted to step back from Hollywood. Growing up with a famous father gave Dirk a unique perspective. He never desperately chased fame. Yet his natural talent and hard work led to a solid career. In recent years, he became widely recognized for playing Detective Michael Hitchcock on NBC's hit comedy Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Outside of work, Dirk built a happy family life. He married Danielle Aubuchon in 1990, and they have 2 children together. He frequently expresses his deep love and appreciation for his wife. One Valentine's Day, he shared an old photo of them from their early days, writing, "Falling for the person who's made me this happy and having her feel the same way has made for a glorious life together. Happy Valentine's Day." Dirk continues to honor his father's memory. In 2021, he posted a photo of Dan, sharing that hardly a day passes without thinking of him or feeling his influence. In that same post, he urged others to reach out to their own parents, reminding them to express their love while they still can. In a rare, emotional interview, marking the 45th anniversary of his father's passing, Dirk revealed how deeply Dan's death affected him as a teenager. "I was only 15 when he died, right at that age when you're trying to figure out who you are. To lose your compass at that moment is devastating." Dirk went through a rough patch of rebellion and anger, struggling with grief while living in the shadow of a beloved TV icon. What helped him heal was finding his father's journal, filled with thoughts on fatherhood and hopes for his kids' futures. Reading his words, in his handwriting, made me feel like he was still guiding me. I've carried some of those pages with me to every set I've ever worked on. They're my talisman. This private connection to his father has shaped Dirk's own acting career, where colleagues note his exceptional kindness to crew members and mentoring of younger actors, qualities that echo his father's legendary on-set reputation. The tragic death of Dan Blocker. On May 13, 1972, after 13 seasons playing the kind-hearted, larger-than-life Eric Hoss Cartwright. On NBC's Bonanza, Dan Blocker died suddenly and completely out of the blue. His death at just 43 shocked everyone who knew him, family, friends, and the millions of fans who'd welcomed him into their homes each week. It also left the show's producers in a terrible bind, as filming for what would become Bonanza's final season was about to kick off. Blocker wasn't just another TV star. He was adored by his co-stars and crew, known for being so down-to-earth and easygoing. He made everyone around him feel comfortable. Mitch Vogel, who played Jamie Hunter Cartwright in Bonanza's later seasons, once described Blocker as totally approachable, the kind of guy you'd want to grab a beer with after a long day of shooting. His death created an unprecedented problem for the series. As one of Bonanza's core characters, losing him made it nearly impossible to wrap up ongoing storylines. Back then, TV shows rarely addressed the real-life death of a leading actor, and Bonanza's approach broke new ground. Today, it's pretty common for shows to acknowledge when a major character passes away. But in 1972, nobody was doing that. Blocker's death didn't just signal the beginning of the end for Bonanza. It changed how network television handled such tragedies forever. In a heartbreaking coincidence few people know about, Dan had been actively planning a major career shift in the months before his unexpected death. According to production documents and personal letters found among his papers, he'd been developing a children's educational TV series that would combine his love of teaching with his performance skills. He had meetings scheduled with PBS executives the week after his fatal surgery and had already filmed a pilot featuring puppets and animation to teach reading skills to underprivileged kids. Michael Landon later said this project had sparked a fire in his friend. Dan told me, "Bonanza gave me fame and fortune, but this could be the work that matters." He was more excited about this than anything I'd seen in years. What went wrong? In the early 1970s, Dan Blocker moved his family to Switzerland. Being strongly against U.S. involvement in Vietnam, he wanted a quieter life, away from all the political turmoil. But he stayed dedicated to Bonanza, regularly flying back to Los Angeles for filming. When Blocker returned to the States to start work on Bonanza's final season, he wasn't feeling great. Weak and unsteady, he checked himself into the hospital, where doctors said he needed his gallbladder removed. Gallbladder surgery, or cholecystectomy, as the docs call it, is pretty routine, with over 1 million performed in the U.S. every year. At first, Blocker seemed to be recovering just fine, relieved to finally be rid of those painful gallstones. Everything looked good until disaster struck out of nowhere. While recovering, he developed a pulmonary embolism, a sudden blockage in the arteries of his lungs, and just like that, he was gone. It happened so fast. 1 minute, he was upbeat about the future, smiling about what lay ahead. The next, he was gone, just like that. What made his passing even sadder was that just hours before his surgery, Blocker had been on the phone with each of his kids, who were still in Switzerland with their mom. According to Dirk, their dad had been joking about the vacation he was about to have in the hospital and promised to bring them silly souvenirs from the gift shop. The family had been planning a summer reunion in California once school ended, and Blocker was excitedly describing all the places he wanted to take them. None of them had any clue it would be their last conversation. The shocking suddenness left his family with no chance to say goodbye, something Dolfia later described as one of the hardest parts of their loss. Blocker was laid to rest in Woodmen's Cemetery in his hometown of DeKalb, Texas. His family held a private funeral where he was buried beside his parents and sister. Lorne Greene, who played Ben Cartwright, was devastated by losing his longtime friend and co-star. He couldn't imagine Bonanza without Blocker, later telling his wife, "That's it, it's finished." And in many ways, he was right. Bonanza would never be the same. However, the producers felt the show deserved a final season, one last chance to say goodbye properly. To make that happen, they had to take an unprecedented step, doing something that had never been done in television history. The funeral itself showed just how deeply Dan had touched people from all walks of life. Despite the family trying to keep the service private, hundreds of locals gathered outside the cemetery to pay respects. Among them were several of Dan's former students from his teaching days, some who'd traveled across multiple states after hearing the news. Perhaps most touching was a group of Korean War veterans from his old unit who performed a military honor guard ceremony that wasn't publicized. According to one attendee, there wasn't a dry eye when a former student of Dan's, now a music teacher himself, played a haunting trumpet rendition of Taps as they lowered the casket. Bonanza's final season. The tough decision was made to write Dan Blocker's character, Hoss Cartwright, out of Bonanza, reflecting the real-life grief the cast and crew were experiencing. The writers wanted viewers to feel that loss too, making it clear the show couldn't just pretend nothing had changed. It was brutal for everyone involved. Michael Landon, who both starred in and wrote for the series, had originally created the two-part season opener, Forever, with Blocker in mind. After Dan died, Landon had to completely rework the script, shifting the storyline from Hoss to Little Joe. The episode is one of the most gut-wrenching in Bonanza's entire run. Little Joe falls for a young woman named Alice Harper after saving her brother John from a dangerous poker game. Joe and Alice get married, and she soon gets pregnant, seeming to set up a happy future. But then tragedy strikes when John's gambling debts catch up to him. A ruthless gambler named Sloan comes to collect, sending his goons to Alice's home. When she refuses to give in to their demands, they beat her to death. John gets shot, and to cover their tracks, the attackers set the house on fire. Joe comes home to find his whole world literally going up in flames, and the rest of the episode deals with the aftermath of his devastating loss. This marked a turning point for Bonanza. Without Hoss, the show struggled to maintain its emotional center, and his absence hung over the final season like a shadow. In what remained a closely guarded production secret for decades, the script for Forever had originally been written as a touching story about Hoss falling in love and starting a family. Notes from story meetings revealed that Dan had been deeply moved when he first read it, telling Landon, "This is the episode I've been waiting for all these years." The original script included scenes showing Hoss as an expectant father, nervously setting up a nursery on the Ponderosa, moments Blocker had been particularly excited to play. These scenes made rewriting the script even more painful for Landon, knowing how much the storyline had meant to his friend. Years later, Victor Sen Young, who played Hop Sing, revealed that during filming of the revised version, the entire cast and crew wore black armbands when cameras weren't rolling, a private tribute to their missing friend. Hoss's absence. If you're wondering how all this connects to Hoss's death, it becomes painfully clear through how the characters grieve. While Forever doesn't directly address Dan Blocker's passing, Hoss's absence is felt in several heartbreaking moments throughout. Michael Landon later explained they chose to acknowledge Hoss's death subtly, mentioning it in passing rather than dedicating an entire episode to it. Though some fans might have wanted a bigger tribute, Landon believed keeping it simple and straightforward was exactly how Blocker would have wanted it. One especially emotional moment happens when Joe takes Alice Harper to a spot he and his brother used to call their happy place. When Alice comments that he must have loved his brother very much, Joe's pained reaction says everything without a single word. You can feel how much he misses Hoss. Later, when Ben and Joe mourn over Alice Harper and her unborn baby at their graveside, Ben quietly acknowledges that he understands what it's like to lose a son. In another heartbreaking scene, Ben stares at a picture of Hoss on Joe's dresser, his face filled with grief. But probably the most powerful scene in Forever comes when Ben and Joe visit the burned-out remains of Alice's cabin, where she and her baby were murdered. Overcome with sorrow, father and son embrace and break down sobbing in a way that seems completely out of character for these tough Western men. But in that moment, it wasn't just acting. Everyone on set knew that Michael Landon and Lorne Greene weren't simply performing. They were grieving their real-life friend and co-star. When the cameras stopped rolling, much of the cast and crew joined them in tears. Throughout the final season, Ben occasionally mentions losing Hoss, though the show never explains exactly how he died. It wasn't until years later, in the 1988 TV movie Bonanza: The Next Generation, that fans finally got an answer. Hoss supposedly drowned while trying to save someone else, a heroic end fitting for such a character. Filming while in mourning. As you can imagine, Dan Blocker's death devastated the Bonanza cast and crew. To many, it felt like losing an actual family member. Filming the Forever episode was incredibly emotional, but in some ways, it also brought comfort. Despite the heaviness, being back on set let everyone share their favorite Blocker memories. Conversations were full of "remember when Dan did this," and "if only he were here to see that." His presence was still deeply felt, even in his absence. But nothing was harder than filming that first scene without him. Michael Landon remembered that while dining room scenes were usually serious in the show, behind the scenes they'd been full of laughter. Blocker had a knack for keeping things light, always ready with a joke or kind word. Now those once happy memories carried an unmistakable sadness. His absence was impossible to ignore. The laughter he brought, the camaraderie he created. Those things didn't just disappear, but they became bittersweet reminders of the hole he left behind. The end of Bonanza. Truth is, Bonanza was already struggling before Dan Blocker died. Ratings had been sliding for a while, but losing Hoss felt like the final blow. The show had also been hurt by a major schedule change. After years of owning Sunday nights at 9 p.m., it got moved to Tuesdays at 8 p.m. While not quite as bad as the dreaded Friday night death slot, it was still a big downgrade. To make matters worse, Bonanza now had to compete with ABC's popular Movie of the Week, which was airing hits like Brian's Song, Ben-Hur, and Michael Crichton's Pursuit. Without Hoss, Bonanza just didn't feel the same. Interest in the final season dwindled, and despite everyone giving their best effort, the series wrapped up in 1973. Thankfully, Bonanza found new life in reruns, a fitting afterlife for a show that had once ruled television. Dan Blocker truly was the heart and soul of Bonanza, and it's no surprise his absence left such a void. That's not taking anything away from the rest of the cast. Every Cartwright played a crucial role, but imagining the series without Hoss was like picturing the Ponderosa without its foundation. Real estate. When he died, Dan Blocker owned several properties, showing just how far he'd come from his humble beginnings. One of his most impressive homes was a 6,000 square foot Tudor-style mansion in the ritzy Hancock Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. Years later, that same house would become home to rock musician and filmmaker Rob Zombie. Besides his Hancock Park estate, Blocker also had a place in Inglewood, reflecting his investments in different parts of the city. Beyond his personal properties, Blocker's legacy lives on in Malibu, California, where a beautiful stretch of coastline bears his name. Dan Blocker Beach stands as a lasting tribute to the beloved actor, thanks to the generosity of his Bonanza co-stars, Michael Landon and Lorne Greene. In the 1970s, the two actors co-owned that beachfront property, and in 1979, 7 years after Blocker's death, they decided to donate the land to California, ensuring their friend would be remembered. Later, in 1995, the state transferred ownership of Dan Blocker Beach, along with several other parcels, to Los Angeles County, where it remains a recognized landmark today. Man, isn't Dan Blocker's story just wild? Gets me every time. Look, if you dug this throwback to the Bonanza days, do me a solid and hit that like button. Seriously, helps out more than you know. And hey, if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? I'm diving into all these amazing Golden Age stars every week, the ones our grandparents couldn't stop talking about. Next week's video? Absolute gold, trust me. Drop a comment with who you're dying to learn about next. Catch you on the next one.